This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hello, I'm Ritula Shah. Thank you for downloading the World Tonight podcast on Tuesday the 16th of October. On the programme, the Commons Speaker, John Bercow, has told friends he'll stand down next summer. But following the publication of a report into bullying and harassment in Parliament, some MPs believe he should go much sooner. We'll hear why. We have a harrowing report from Yemen where civilians are being killed in Saudi-led airstrikes. But will the disappearance of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi change international attitudes towards the kingdom? We'll hear from the winner of this year's Man Booker Prize for Literature, and we have a special report from the US state of Nebraska ahead of the midterm elections. He's already the longest-serving Speaker of the House of Commons since the Second World War. But now John Bercow's told friends he intends to stand down from the role next summer, which would coincide with his 10th year in office. But that may not be soon enough for some MPs, who've been calling for him to go following the publication of a damning report into bullying and harassment at Westminster. This condemned a culture in which abusive behaviour was tolerated and covered up. The report's author, the former High Court judge, Dame Laura Cox, didn't investigate individual cases, but concluded that highly placed figures should consider whether they could change the culture in Parliament and, if not, should consider their position. Mr Bercow has denied claims he bullied two of his former private secretaries, claims which MPs chose not to investigate. Here's what the Speaker said in the Commons this afternoon.
I firmly believe that the only possible way to resolve this matter is the establishment of a body which is both entirely independent of and external to Parliament to hear and adjudicate upon all allegations of bullying, harassment and sexual misconduct, including deciding how far to investigate past misconduct. Whether the allegations involve MPs or staff, the same entirely independent body should be in complete control of the process from start to finish.
But Mr Bercow's critics say he isn't the right person to lead the necessary changes. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, though, said now wasn't the time to change Speaker, as Britain faces what she called its biggest constitutional crisis in living memory.
We need to have an experienced Speaker. We need to make sure that the decisions that are made in the next few months for the interests of the country are made properly. And so I am very worried about the idea of having somebody in the Speaker's place who's not experienced. Now, I don't know about these allegations. Certainly all I know is my own interaction with the Speaker, which is I have never seen any of this. And many of the people who work closely with him, who I know, like the Speaker's chaplain, for example, has said that she doesn't recognise this.
So, can John Bercow stay on until next summer? Jess Phillips is a Labour MP who sits on Parliament's Women and Equalities Committee, and she joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening.
Jess Phillips, do you think John Bercow can stay on in office until next summer?
I mean, it's very difficult to say, actually. I think that he very well may do. But politics is a fractious time at the moment, and I think that the calls for him to go will be quite strong.
So do you share the view of those who suggest that his departure, or at least him sort of standing aside from the role, would help to change the culture of bullying and harassment in Parliament?
It would be totemic, there's no doubt about that. However, the idea that if we get rid of John Bercow, suddenly MPs who've been gropey and bullying will suddenly all start behaving properly is a total nonsense. And quite a lot of the people who stood up in Parliament today and said, the fish rots from its head, as if a scalp is going to make systemic change, is nonsense. So whilst John Bercow going, and not just John Bercow, but the management of the Commons going may very well change the culture, it is not on its own going to change anything, and it won't stop the backbench MPs or chairs of committees or whoever it has been who in Laura Cox's report treating people appallingly badly.
Do you then share the point of view of Margaret Beckett, who told PM earlier today that the constitutional future of this country is at stake right now, therefore there shouldn't be a change of Speaker?
No, I mean, I don't. I can understand why people are saying that, and things are incredibly fractious in Westminster, and people are right to worry about big constitutional changes. But for me, from the beginning of the whole sexual harassment scandal and bullying scandal, the call for independent systems to make sure that this is done properly overrides anything. Whilst I think Brexit negotiations are incredibly important, the most important thing facing our country, I'm afraid that we cannot use politics in this.
OK. Jess Phillips, stay on the line for a moment, because Andrew Bridgen, a Conservative MP who's been a fierce critic of John Bercow, is on the line. Andrew Bridgen, a scalp isn't going to change systemic culture of bullying or harassment in Parliament.
No, it's not going to, whether John Bercow's there or not, it's not going to make MPs who've got into a habit of bullying or harassing their staff change overnight. But what Dame Laura Cox was very clear is that she sees the senior management and the Speaker's office, and indeed the Clerk of the House of Commons, David Natzler, as an impediment to the seismic change which is needed if we're going to change the culture in the House of Commons. And I think Jess was very measured in her remarks, and I agree with a lot of what she said. But at the end of the day, we do need a culture change. It's not a huge enough.
Is this a convenient, if you like, excuse? You've been a long-standing critic of John Bercow. This gives you the reason to sort of push for his departure.
I have, but I mean, this has been brewing since the summer when John Bercow was first accused, with obviously accusations that he's denied. But I mean, prior to that, I've been critical of him on impartiality. I think he has, in my view, ripped every page of impartiality from the rulebook of the Speaker. I thought his outspoken criticism and saying he was going to ban the President of the United States from speaking in Westminster Hall was not his position to do that. But
others would say that he's allowed the voice of backbenchers to be stronger by allowing urgent questions on topical issues of the day.
I don't deny that John Bercow has been a reforming Speaker, and many of those reforms have been to the benefit of the House of Commons and our democracy. He certainly has had a lot more urgent questions and holds the government to account, but that cannot make up for some of his behaviour, and I have seen and witnessed him in the House of Commons tearing into relatively newly elected MPs, and it destroys their confidence in the chamber of the House of Commons, which is an intimidating place before you start.
What about Emily Thornberry's point? The Brexit negotiations, the Brexit debates in the House of Commons are going to be tricky. An experienced Speaker is vital at this time.
Well, it's obvious that John Bercow did feel he was in trouble politically over the conclusions of Dame Laura Cox's report. He put out this through friends announcement, which is a re-announcement of exactly what he said last summer when he was in trouble over the bullying scandal, to try and take some of the sting out of the immediate calls for his head. But I'll tell you now that an official statement was put out by the Speaker's office this evening saying that John Bercow has not said that he's standing down anytime soon or given a date for it. So he's already rode back from those friends of friends have said. So very briefly then, if you could have your way, do you think he should go immediately? I think if we want the systemic change recommended by Dame Laura Cox, we need to start with the removal of John Bercow and probably the Clerk of the House of Commons. Andrew Bridgen, thank you very much. Jess Phillips, I think you're still on the line. Andrew Bridgen wants to see John Bercow go immediately. Is there a danger that if Labour continue to support him, they'll be seen as somehow propping up the Speaker?
Absolutely, there's a danger of that. Absolutely. But I think that on the flip side of it, Andrew and some of the other critics who stood up against the Speaker today, they're at danger of playing politics with people's lives. And, you know, I don't recall Andrew Bridgen or James Duddridge, who was very critical today of the Speaker. I don't recall big calls from them around Damien Green or Michael Fallon. And it's a real sadness to me as somebody who has throughout this process had to shop in some of my dearest colleagues and friends because it is the right thing to do, that on both sides, it doesn't seem that the victims and actually systemic change is the fundamental driver, and that is all that matters to me.
Jess Phillips, thank you very much. Jess Phillips and Andrew Bridgen. The disappearance of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi is reverberating around the world. Turkey's widening its search for clues, including in the Saudi consul's Istanbul residence. Meanwhile, business bosses from all over the place have pulled out of a high-profile investment conference in Saudi Arabia. And following talks with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the US says the Saudis have agreed to a thorough and transparent investigation into the fate of the journalist. But questions about Saudi Arabia's leadership have been growing. When Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman came to power, he was portrayed as a reformer. The senior Republican senator, Lindsey Graham, says he used to be the prince's biggest defender, but the Khashoggi incident has made him change his mind.
This guy is a wrecking ball. He had this guy murdered in a consulate in Turkey, and to expect me to ignore it, I feel used and abused. The MBS figure is, to me, toxic. He can never be a world leader on the world stage.
So what does the president do? Sanctions?
It's up to the president, but what I would do, I know what I'm going to do. We're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia.
Well, the Crown Prince, known as MBS, may have reopened cinemas and allowed Saudi women to drive, but he was also quick to crush dissent, locking up his rivals in a luxury hotel and detaining women's rights campaigners. And then there's the war in Yemen, where the Saudi-led coalition's bombing campaign has taken a high toll on civilians. Human rights agencies are warning that millions of Yemenis are facing starvation and are demanding an end to the airstrikes. The BBC has had exclusive access to the scene of an attack which killed 53 civilians in the northern province of Saada in August. Local officials say the dead included 42 schoolboys on a bus. The coalition said the bus was a legitimate military target carrying Houthi fighters. It later apologised for what it called collateral damage. Campaigners say the attack is an apparent war crime, and countries selling arms to Saudi Arabia will be complicit in future deadly attacks. The UK is one of the major arms suppliers to the Saudis. From the town of Dayan, Orla Gerlin reports.
It's about 8:30 in the morning. This is the time when the airstrike took place, and I'm at the exact spot. It's on the main street in Dahian. It's a busy area. There are little shops here, there's a food stall right next door, a small street restaurant directly opposite. There are traders going by on bicycles with baskets on the front. There are school children passing me by with their backpacks. This is a busy civilian area. Even if the bus had been full of fighters, not school children, the risk to innocent civilians in this area must surely have been clear. And some are asking if the airstrike was a war crime. I'm inside a small food shop, and I'm with the driver of the bus. This is the shop he came into to buy water for the children. He doesn't want to be identified. He's worried about Saudi retaliation, but he has agreed to speak to us. Can you tell me what happened that day?
I got off to get them water from this supermarket and went back to give it to them. After that, I went to get myself a sandwich. As soon as I got back, the rocket hit the bus. I was terrified and blacked out. I didn't know what was going on. I thought the rocket hit the supermarket. I didn't think it had hit the bus. Not even 1%. I didn't think that at all.
Did you ever imagine this could happen to a bus full of school children?
To this day, I still can't believe this has happened. 72 children between the ages of 6 and 7. My mind still can't accept this. Even in the jungle where there are animals, this wouldn't happen.
You know, I'm sure that Britain and America are selling many, many arms to the Saudis. Is there anything that you would like to say to the people of Britain?
My view is that they are partly responsible for the bloody murders of these children. Even those who are silent about this are responsible. Everyone, including the media and politicians, are all responsible for these bloody murders. They will be judged for their actions on Judgment Day.
Right outside, we met Mohammed Al-Haraji, whose 10-year-old son, Yahya, was on the bus. He had to identify him by his teeth. Many of the bodies were mixed together, he told us. Some people said, "This is my son." Others said, "No, this is mine." I had evidence, so I got my boy's body and put him in his grave. 13-year-old Mohammed Ibrahim survived the attack, but many of his friends did not. There's no beauty in life now, he said, and no future. It's destroyed. At the Al Najaf school, the empty chairs tell their own story. The devoted headmaster, Abdul Wahab Abdullah, is haunted by the absence of so many. When I meet the parents, he says, I tell them, you have lost one child, but I have lost 42. Everyone in that bus was like a son to me.
أحمد زيد حسين ضيب يوسف حسين حسين ضيب أسامة زيد علي الحمران.
The headmaster hopes the world will remember the names of the victims.
يحيى مهدي عز الدين حورية يحيى مهدي عز الدين حورية.
He takes the register, not of the living, but of the dead.
محمد عبد الإله محمد علي زيد الحمران.
Orla Guerin reporting. Well, the UK exports billions of pounds worth of goods to Saudi Arabia, and according to the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, Britain sold £4.6 billion worth of arms to the kingdom since the beginning of the Yemeni conflict in 2015. But does the conduct of the war in Yemen and now the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi raise serious questions for the government with regards to its relationship with Riyadh? The Conservative MP Kwasi Kwarteng has visited Saudi Arabia twice at the invitation of the kingdom's rulers. I asked him if MBS, the powerful crown prince who had been touted as a reformer, had been misread.
I don't think he was misread. I think that he's clearly an ambitious, quite aggressive young ruler. He doesn't want to waste his time, as he said. I've met him on a couple of occasions on a delegation, and I felt that he had a very clear-eyed view of where he wanted to go. Now, this particular crime, as it would appear to be, is completely monstrous. Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance is inexplicable, and we have to ask very hard questions about his disappearance to the regime and also to the highest authorities in Saudi Arabia, and I think that's what's happening.
Does the West have to bear some responsibility, in a sense, by perhaps giving the Saudi rulers, the Saudi leadership, a sense of its own power, its own authority, that it had the backing of other countries?
I don't think that's quite right. I think what happened, as always happens in international relations, is that you have dealings, countries have dealings with all sorts of different powers, different political regimes. And that's what diplomacy is about. Diplomacy isn't simply about talking to people you like. And I think we had reasonably good relations with Saudi Arabia, but clearly with this Jamal Khashoggi incident, they've overstepped the mark, whoever it might be. This is clearly a very serious juncture, and they have questions to answer.
We've just been hearing from Yemen, from Orla Guerin, an interview with a bus driver there, the bus that was hit, carrying school children, hit by a Saudi rocket. That bus driver told the BBC the people responsible for arms sales to Saudi Arabia should be held accountable for the death of those children.
I think, again, that's something which I don't agree with. I think countries... I mean, Yemen is a war situation. What happened...
A war which many people, Saudi Arabia, has pushed very hard and has been responsible for escalating.
We can talk about Yemen. I mean, what happened in Yemen was that there was a legitimate government which was overthrown, and the Saudis want to restore the legitimate government. Now, in the course of that war, many terrible things have happened, as they do in all wars. But what I would say is that killing, or the disappearance, should I say, of a journalist in your own consulate is a clear breach of international, not only international law, but protocol.
And the targeting of civilians in Yemen isn't?
Well, as far as the Saudis are concerned, they're not targeting civilians. I mean,
OK, so if we return in the light of the disappearance then of Jamal Khashoggi, How do you think that the UK-Saudi relationship should change?
I think it must be absolutely clear, and I think the Foreign Secretary was right, that we have to ask serious questions about what happened to him. In the long term, I think that we don't have to reappraise the entire relationship. Leaders come and go, governments come and go, but the countries have to have a sustainable relationship. I have no idea how long the current regime in Saudi Arabia with regard to the Crown Prince, the current Crown Prince, is going to last. There have been many Crown Princes. I mean, when I first visited the kingdom, the current king was the Crown Prince, and there were one or two other people who were in the frame to succeed him as Crown Prince. So these pieces shift quite regularly.
So when the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that he was going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia and that he felt used and abused by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, would you say that there might be a similar sentiment in the
I think people will be.
government?
I think people who have tried to reach out to Saudi Arabia will be very disappointed at what has happened. There's no question that people invested a lot of hope in the Crown Prince. And if he is involved in this disappearance or even killing of Jamal Khashoggi, I mean, that would have very serious consequences. There's no doubt about that. But what I would like to say is that there's a lot of emotionalism about this, which is absolutely justified. But actually, as countries, as states, as foreign offices and diplomats, we have to look at a much longer time frame in terms of the relationship.
The Conservative MP Kwasi Kwarteng. So does the future of Saudi Arabia's most powerful figure, the Crown Prince, MBS, now look less secure? Robin Wright is a foreign affairs analyst who writes for The New Yorker magazine and has written several books on the Middle East, and she joins me now. Good evening.
Good to be with you.
Robin Wright, MBS, how do you think his position looks tonight? There's clearly still a very close relationship with the United States, but an international outcry.
MBS looks far more precarious than he has since he became the Crown Prince in the summer of 2017. But it's very hard to see how he would be pushed aside. He has consolidated the 5 major branches of power in the Royal Court, in the Economic Council, as Minister of Defense. He has been headstrong in challenging any form of dissent, even people like Jamal Khashoggi, who actually supported the monarchy and the House of Saud and really had criticized its tactics and its Crown Prince more than the system itself. So he is in trouble.
But what about from within the House of Saud? Presumably his ascent was watched jealously by some.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big questions is, how are other members of the royal family reacting? After all, he bypassed hundreds and hundreds of princes who felt that they were in line, those who were older, even some of the founder of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud's original sons. And it's not just an issue of power, it's also the privilege and perks that come along with being in the royal family. And in effect, by appointing Mohammed bin Salman, the king created, in effect, a new royal family with dissent bypassing many others. So there are questions about whether others in the royal family would pledge loyalty to him if he became king. But it's also very hard to see how there is enough opposition within the kingdom to oust him.
Briefly, will this blow over and the economic ties, which are very deep, prevail, whether it's the export of arms or it's Saudi Arabian investment in, for instance, the tech sector?
Saudi Arabia will clearly pay a price economically, and I think in terms of its leverage with the United States and other Western powers, short term. Long term, we've seen crisis after crisis, including the 9/11 attacks, and the relationship has repaired.
Robin Wright, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The World Tonight. The headlines so far. BBC News understands that the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, has decided to stand down next summer. President Trump says Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince has told him a full investigation is underway into the disappearance of a Saudi journalist. The winner of the 50th Man Booker Prize has just been announced. Rebecca Jones is in the Guildhall in the City of London with the winner, Anna Burns. Rebecca.
Ritala, well, I'm just waiting for the winner. It's rather an excitable atmosphere here in the Guildhall. She's just being interviewed by someone else at the moment, but no worries, she will come to me very soon. In the meantime, perhaps I can tell you just a little bit about her prize-winning novel, because it is her third novel, and she drew on the experience of Northern Ireland during the Troubles to write her novel Milkman. It's seen through the eyes of an 18-year-old girl, and she's being pursued by a very sinister member of a paramilitary organisation, and that is Milkman of the title, although he isn't actually a milkman. The judges praised its surprising and immersive prose. They said it was enormously rewarding, and while challenging, it was definitely worth it. In fact, the chair of the judges told me that it's a bit like climbing Snowdon. Quite an effort, but once you get to the top, the view was worth it.
So was it a surprise then? It wasn't tipped to be a winner?
It wasn't tipped to be a winner, and I think it was a surprise. The favourite had been Richard Powers for his big, sweeping, ecological epic, The Overstory, but nonetheless, in the end, Anna Burns won out, and I'm delighted to say that she is with us now. Anna Burns, welcome. You're broadcasting live on The World Tonight on the BBC, and many congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you.
You seemed quite astounded to win. Would that be fair?
I feel I've been living in a dream world today, so everything feels very unreal. So that was just another part of the unreality. Yes, I was stunned. I was stunned.
And you've made Man Booker history, I don't know if you're aware of that, by becoming the first Northern Irish author to win this prize. Oh, you didn't know that?
Well, I didn't make the connection. Everything's been moving so fast, I didn't make that connection. Wow.
Double congratulations. Now, the book draws on the Troubles in Northern Ireland, seen through the eyes of an 18-year-old girl. How much of the book is inspired by your own experiences growing up in Belfast in the 1970s?
Well, I'd say it had a huge influence on how I wrote the book. I wrote about a city that's affected by long-term violence, living under intense pressure, so that it seems like it's normal, and I thought it was normal. And
you're lost for words. Let me ask you another question. I can see it's been quite an overwhelming and emotional evening. The judges called it an experimental novel, and there are pages without paragraphs and words tumble and jumble over each other. Why did you decide that structure would work best for your novel?
Well, the short answer is I didn't decide. That's how it came, and it is a character-driven novel in that I wait for my characters to come and tell me who they are and what their story is, and in their voices. And because it's a first-person narrator, it seems as if the whole story is through her voice, but actually it's the diction of the entire community it's more through her. Digressions are part of her protection, and she speaks and talks in long paragraphs basically, and I have to record it exactly as she gives me it, otherwise I don't get it. So basically that's it. I don't manage it, I don't exploit it, I just put it down.
She has no name, and nor do any of the other characters in your book have a name. They're called Middle Sister or Somebody McSomebody or Maybe Boyfriend. Why no names?
Well, again, that's how it came. I did think at one point to try names, but even as I tried them, it felt like going through mud or something. I knew it was wrong, but I just wanted to see, and it was wrong. The book wouldn't continue till I took all the names out again, and I'm glad I did, and there's no way I wouldn't have. But I think that's part of there's a collective mindset in the book where the collective is more important than the individual, and so individual identity or autonomy. So I think that's partly why there are no names, there are no... I can't remember what you asked me.
No,
I just
don't
said
worry.
that.
Look, you've won a cheque for £50,000. Have you got any idea what you might spend it on?
Yes, I'm going to clear my debts, and I'm going to live on it. which would be wonderful. Absolute gift.
OK. Well, look, Anna Burns, many congratulations. I can see not only talking to us live on The World Tonight, but actually winning the Man Booker Prize for Fiction for your third novel, Milkman, is quite overwhelming. Go and enjoy your evening, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rebecca Jones, thank you very much. A lovely evening there, it sounds like, at the Man Booker Prize. Congratulations to Anna Burns. With the US midterm elections 3 weeks away, Democrats are hoping to ride a blue wave and regain control of one or both houses of Congress. In primary elections to determine candidates, several established Democrats lost out to newcomers on the progressive wing of the party, even in some of the most conservative parts of the country. Jamie Kumarasamy is in one of those places, Nebraska. Jamie, you're in Omaha. Why have you gone there?
Hi, Ritla. Yes, well, welcome to the banks of the Missouri River. I'm at the spot where explorers Lewis and Clark landed on their travels towards the Pacific more than 2 centuries ago. The most adventurous people here today seem to be Tuesday afternoon joggers braving the scorching sun. But there is a new breed of pioneer in this part of Nebraska, the Progressive Democrat, because the party hoping to take back Congress in next month's midterm elections hasn't chosen a traditional middle-of-the-road candidate to try and unseat the House Republican in this very winnable swing district, but someone on the left of the party. Bear in mind, the last time this largely rural Midwestern state voted for a Democratic presidential candidate was for LBJ back in 1964. The political novice chosen in a primary upset has knocked on 170,000 doors, she tells me, to win that race. She knows, though, if she wants to get to Washington, she's got a lot more ground to cover.
Not hard. Oh, there's somebody there. Hi, how are you? My name's Cara Eastman. I'm running for the United States Congress.
Okay. Door knocking can be a dangerous pursuit for an aspiring member of Congress.
I actually got bit by a dog the other day when I was canvassing. This little tiny white dog. I was talking to this woman, and her dog jumped up and bit me. And I was bleeding down my hand, but I didn't want her to see because she was telling me about how she only had half a colon and healthcare was so important to her. And so I didn't want to interrupt her.
The candidate with the bite marks to prove her commitment is Cara Eastman, a social worker who supports a publicly funded universal healthcare system, a policy known as Medicare for All. That pitch, long considered too left-wing out here in the Great Plains, helped to defeat a more centrist ex-congressman to become her party's candidate. And it's a message that seems to resonate.
Do you think I might be able to count on your vote on November 6th?
Yes, healthcare is a high priority of mine.
That's great. Well, I appreciate that.
Cara Eastman told me why healthcare is what motivated her to run for Congress.
My mom was diagnosed with cancer for the 5th time and prescribed a pill that was $2,500. And we were...
One pill?
One pill. And that was something she was going to have to take monthly. And I remember saying to her on the phone, how could a pill be $2,500? And you have Medicare. Of course, the pill would be covered. And she said it wasn't. And that was in addition to the $800 a month she was already paying in prescriptions. And I didn't realize that this issue of pharmaceutical costs in our country was so out of control.
The power that you have as a member of a band, to sway the masses and connect with people on such a raw level.
As she drives around the neighbourhood with her campaign staff, it's not her policies but her punk rock past which dominates conversation. Something else that makes her an unconventional candidate in a largely conservative state.
Look at who's president of the United States. Anyone can be anything.
Right. I can be the lead singer of a band. You can.
Cara Eastman's husband is the lead singer of a band which supported Green Day, whose music is blasting from the car stereo. So you really are the punk rock candidate.
Yeah, so it's funny because the band that I was in college, when I was 18, was a band that was already formed, and they asked me to sing with them a few times. And it was a band that had a colorful name, and so that's what the Republicans are using to attack me on.
It's a name we're not allowed to use on the radio, but it says Pieces of F.
Cara Eastman's been a radical since her school days. In college.
And this is how that radio attack ad frames her contest against a military veteran.
While Eastman was dropping F-bombs, Don Bacon was serving in the Air Force, a liberal radical versus an American patriot.
Hi, I'm Don Bacon.
Hi, sorry about the dogs.
Oh, that's all right. You know what? You gotta have a good guard dog.
Also braving the neighbourhood dogs, her decidedly non-punk Republican opponent. Don Bacon is a one-term congressman and a retired Air Force general.
She's scared of everything, so she's not very good.
Gosh, probably said there's bacon out there.
Yeah.
I gotta smell good bacon.
But anyway,
okay.
Ah, yes, the name.
I noticed you made the bacon joke there.
Yeah, I do every time. I have an ad right now where I'm cooking bacon. I say when the heat's up, bacon gets even better. When you take a hard stand in Washington, you will take the heat. That's why I don't mind breaking a few eggs. Strengthen our national defense. Get our economy moving and provide better health care for our veterans. Because everyone in Nebraska knows when you turn up the heat, bacon gets even better. I want to give you my flyer.
Okay.
And do you have a campaign?
He says that he's turning up the heat on his opponent.
I'm pro-union. I don't have any issues.
I got 9 unions endorse me.
Getting endorsements from traditionally Democratic-supporting unions who feel uneasy with the party's move to the left.
I know in this district, they want a Nebraska conservative representing them, not a Bernie Sanders Democratic Socialist. And that's the choice in this race. Her positions maybe play well in San Francisco or Berkeley, maybe New York. They don't play well in Nebraska.
Well, you know what they say here in Nebraska, if you don't like the weather, wait a couple minutes. That's about it.
A sudden snowstorm descends on Omaha as I go to meet the city's former Democratic mayor, Mike Boyle. He doesn't agree that Cara Eastman will lose traditional Democratic voters, arguing that her centrepiece policies are no longer on the fringe.
She's not to the left. She's really speaking out to what needs to happen. It's the logical change that needs to come from progressive systems of government. We're one of the few countries in the world that's supposed to be civilized that doesn't take care of our people through health care. So this is nothing radical.
You count on your support on November 6th? All right. And do you mind if I ask you a couple more questions? All right.
As young Bacon campaign volunteers canvass votes, we get the view of a wise old man of the Republican Party, Hal Daub, 4-term congressman and 2-term mayor of Omaha. He says the Bacon-Eastman contest has national implications.
So think about this race for the House seat here as a bellwether indicator. Seems to me that if Don Bacon, the Republican nominee, wins here, that will be a signal that the composition of the voter is still leaning objectively, moderately to the right.
Are you familiar with the race at all?
Yes, I am.
Very good.
And at this point in time, you both already got my vote.
Oh, fantastic. I appreciate that.
I want you to spend.
On the doorstep, Cara Eastman seems to be winning hearts, minds and votes, but will it be enough for victory? Will a broadly conservative state like Nebraska send a progressive punk fan to Washington? A question for the supporter she's just spoken to, Ned Donahoe.
I believe that there is potential for a movement based on current political standings. Maybe I should say I hope versus I believe.
Hope, but not necessarily belief for that Democratic voter. Maybe he'll feel a bit more confident after today's news that the Eastman campaign is currently winning the fundraising war, getting more than $1 million in donations from around the country in the last few weeks. Another sign this local race has national significance for the Democratic Party, both in terms of its direction and its ability to win majorities in Washington and thus challenge the power of President Trump. Rittler.
Jamie, thanks very much. Tonight's closing headline, BBC News understands that John Bercow is planning to stand down as Speaker of the House of Commons next summer. There have been growing calls for his resignation since a report published yesterday identified a culture of bullying at Westminster. The Labour MP Jess Phillips, though, told this programme it was nonsense to think that claiming Mr Bercow's scalp would bring about systemic change. That's The World Tonight. From me and everyone on the programme, good night.